In an all-out media blitz, Trump administration officials have spent the last 48 hours selling the president's pitch for a deal to reopen the government, a deal Democrats have flatly rejected. Now, here's what the deal demands. $5.7 billion for border wall funding. That number has not changed from the president's initial ask, though in exchange, he is now offering 3 years of protection for so-called dreamers. That is, those are immigrants who were brought to the country illegally as children. The president is also offering 3 years of protection for refugees who fled certain regions and are covered under a temporary protected status program. And he'll sign off on an immediate end to the partial government shutdown, which is now in day 31. This coming Friday would mark another missed payday. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called the offer a non-starter. Democrats arguing it doesn't go far enough. And yet some conservatives say it goes too far, viewing those protections as amnesty. That leaves President Trump in the awkward position of defending himself on all sides. So yesterday, he tweeted out, "No, amnesty is not a part of my offer. Amnesty will be used only on a much bigger deal." Joining me now, newly elected Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell from Florida. She's the first Ecuadorian American in Congress. Congresswoman, thank you very much for joining us. I want to begin actually with some of the president's own base and how they've been reacting to this. The head of the conservative D.C. think tank, the Heritage Foundation, was uncharacteristically critical of the president's offer. In fact, they wrote amnesty should not be part of any border security deal. The proposed compromise is not the best way forward. President Trump says it is not amnesty, as we showed in that Twitter. So let me ask you first, how do you characterize what the president is offering in his deal on Saturday?
Well, Eamon, thank you for having me this afternoon. I have to tell you that he's really not offering anything at this point. What he did is take away those protections from DACA recipients. We had those in place. In the past 2 years, there was a Republican-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate, and he was unable to pass any sort of comprehensive immigration reform. He was unable to get any funding for this border wall. We are focused on opening this government. That has been my priority. I have been talking to people here in my community as an immigrant, listening to their needs, but also all of our federal workers that right now are going without pay. So we cannot tie this issue, opening the government, to a very complex policy issue. We just cannot govern in that way. What I am asking the Senate is for them to put bills forth that we have passed. I have voted 9 times, Eamon, 9, to reopen the government on bipartisan bills that were passed unanimously in the Senate. I don't understand why the Senate is not bringing forth these bills.
So, Congresswoman, I'm curious to get your thoughts a little bit. And some in the Democratic Party and some of the leadership have criticized the president, saying this is not a genuine offer, saying that had he been genuine, he would not have made this offer on TV, but through negotiations that are kind of taking place, if you will. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, though. Do the Democrats run the risk of not returning to the negotiating table or countering the president's offer by simply just not responding to it, other than saying we won't accept this?
Look, I have to tell you, Eamon, that we've been having a lot of conversations, the Democratic caucus in the House, and our focus, like I said before, is to reopen the government. We can't negotiate with someone that has been changing his mind from one day to the next. He has controlled his seat in office, creating manufactured crisis after manufactured crisis. He's not reliable. He changes his mind from one day to the next. And to tie dreamers to a conversation related to border security is truly insulting. Dreamers are Americans like you and me. They have lived in this country most of their lives. They don't know any other country. They can't call any other country their home. So it's insulting. We need to separate that conversation. And this is not about border security. What he's doing is playing political games, distracting from the fact that we were elected to deal with the issues that are facing the American people, which is to control healthcare costs and expand access, to also deal with the crisis that affects us with climate change, especially down here in South Florida. So I'd like to open the government. I would like for the Senate to do what they were elected to do, which is to work for the American people and open the government so we can really have conversations about border security, immigration reform in the next few months.
So help us understand, help our viewers understand, where is the common ground, the middle ground, that a normal person who does not necessarily follow the nuances of this can say, here are where the Democrats are willing to meet their counterparts halfway through, at least?
Amen. We passed bipartisan bills. These bills that we passed on January 3rd when we were sworn in were the Republican bills that were passed unanimously by the Senate. So what I would like for the American public to understand is that we have done what we were elected to do. We are working for the American people. We need to put pressure on Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader McConnell, on the Senate. I have asked Senator Rubio, Senator Scott, to do what they need to do, which is to put forth these bills, open the government so that we can actually have serious conversations about our border security. We all agree we need strong border security. But at the same time, these are issues that are going to take a long time to resolve. We can't just accept anything that comes from this president that does not make sense. And we also have a constitutional duty of oversight. We can't allocate $5 billion to a wall that makes no sense. We need to enforce other ports of entry. We need to hire Border Patrol agents. That's where we need to invest our resources, not on a wall that is completely ineffective.
Let me play you this video that NBC News has obtained from U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. It was taken last week, showing 84 migrants rushing off a large tour bus. You see the families from Central America crossing the border into Arizona. And then they're seen crawling under a fence or barrier of some kind. I'm curious to get your thoughts. Does that video help or hurt the case that you and Democrats make about a barrier? Or does it help or hurt the president's case that you actually need a wall to prevent that from happening?
I mean, exactly. What we need is more Border Patrol agents. I did see that video. It doesn't help. I think that we are focusing on a crisis that does not exist at the border. We have other issues that we need to deal with right here at home. We have a gun violence epidemic that we're not talking about. We have serious issues. Right now, we have several states that have brought to the courts to take away the protections for people living with pre-existing conditions. That's a crisis that we're facing right here at home. A wall is not going to prevent people from crossing the border. We saw another video of someone climbing, I think it was just a couple of days ago, which this young man climbed a wall, a 15, 20-foot wall, in a matter of minutes. So what we need is stronger border security, where we can invest on technology, where we can hire more Border Patrol agents. And at the same time, what I want to say again is we can't have these conversations while the government is not functioning. We need to reopen the government. We have put forth several bills. It's up to the Senate to take those bills, put a vote, instead of just answering to this president. They're working for the American people.
Congresswoman, before I let you go, I just want to get your thoughts on one important development over the weekend. I know that you were just appointed to the House Judiciary Committee. I wanted to ask you about statements made by President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. He is now suggesting that, in fact, the president's Moscow Tower deal was still in play up until the elections of 2016. From where you sit, from your vantage point, how significant of a development is that in your mind?
Well, look, what we're going to be doing is protecting the Mueller investigation. We need to get details. I haven't seen anything in front of me yet that I can comment on. But what I can tell you is that that's part of the reason why this president is getting very nervous, and he is trying to distract the public from the real issue that he is being investigated at this moment. And we need to look at what the Mueller investigation finds. And I'm anxious, just like most of us are, to finally get a final report to understand what really happened in 2016.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.